What if healing was more than something that just happens inside of our bodies? What if healing is also about our connection to the land beneath our feet, the birds flying over our heads, and the countless relationships with nature that make up our world? I'm Elena, and this is the integration session where we explore the science, stories, and future of psychedelics. In today's episode, we're diving into a fascinating conversation about the concept of inner healing intelligence and how it's not only central to psychedelic therapy, but also has the potential to expand psychedelic therapy beyond the individual. My guests today are Keith, Andrée-Anne, and Laura, authors of a recent publication on the topic of inner healing intelligence in the Journal of Psychedelic Studies. They bring expertise in herbalism, vitalist philosophy, and psychedelic science to help us break down the concept of inner healing intelligence, its applications to the practice and study of psychedelic therapies, and how you can connect with your own inner healing intelligence. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Integration Session podcast. Thank you all so much for being here. Like I said before we started, I've never done a podcast with so many people, so I'm really excited to have so much knowledge in one recording, and I'm just hoping it goes smoothly. But we can start with some introductions. So if each of you could please just introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about how you became interested in psychedelics and also how you as an individual are sort of situated in the sphere of psychedelic science and all its related disciplines. So what we can do is go around, and I'll just start with Andrée-Anne.
Thank you. Yes. So my relationship to psychedelic studies is kind of by extension of my love and professional practice as a clinical herbalist and a community educator in the field of herbal medicine. So this is my entry point in the world of psychedelic studies. I am currently engaged in graduate studies in critical educational studies, and I'm the program director for the Indigenous Midwifery Bachelor at First Nation Technical Institute.
Awesome, thank you. Laura?
Yes, and thank you for having us. My background and work is in the world of plant studies or plant humanities, primarily from a philosophical perspective. And I became interested in psychedelics when I was in my master's program here at the California Institute of Integral Studies when Stanislav Grof was still teaching, and was able to take classes with him and became aware of his work on holotropic breath work and also his previous work on LSD and psychedelics much prior to that. And I was one of the people here at CIIS who supported Dr. Janice Phelps when she started the Center for Psychedelic Therapies and Research back in 2015. So I was helping in the background administratively and was able to support her at that point. And then after I completed my doctoral work, I came on full-time with the center and am now the director of the certificate program under Janice here at the CIS Center. And I want to just mention a bit more about plant studies or plant humanities, and that field is turning the lens on plants and fungi themselves as subjects of inquiry with intelligence and agency, maybe sentience, depending on who you're talking to. And so my situation in the field has primarily been educational, but also philosophical.
Amazing, thank you. And Keith?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo earlier comments. Thank you so much for inviting us to join you on this show, Elena. It's a real pleasure, and it's also a real pleasure to sit with Andrée-Anne and Laura and have a chance to chat a bit more about our finished work. And yeah, so it's really great to be here, and thank you. Yeah, I think in terms of my own work, I'm also a plant person. I love plants and fungi, and I studied horticulture and mycology in graduate school, and then education in Indigenous thought. I guess my relationship with plants and fungi is very much hands-on as a gardener and forager. and I think those personal and intimate relations that I developed really since childhood have further informed my work with psychedelic plant and fungal medicines. I remember first encountering Terence McKenna's writing back in high school and being quite entranced by that, and I think all my work in the Indigenous world has also brought me to greater respect and appreciation of these medicines as beings in their own right, and that also ties in with Laura's sharings around critical plant studies. So so I think that's me, and I'm an assistant professor at Athabasca University in the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies, where I have the great privilege to continue doing this research. It feels so amazing, and how wonderful to be able to share it with people. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Keith. So the topic of your paper was inner healing intelligence. So for someone hearing that term for the first time, what does that mean exactly? And I would love to know a little bit more about where this concept of inner healing intelligence first developed. So we can start with whoever wants to jump in, and then feel free to build off of each other.
I mean, I suppose you could really trace inner healing intelligence in the psychedelic sphere back to some of Stanislav Grof's work. And Laura had mentioned Stan Grof earlier, and really I think the first book of his that I read was back in the 90s. It was Beyond the Brain, and he articulated inner healing intelligence as the innate tendency of living organisms to move towards healing or wholeness. And we, in our paper, and thank you for bringing it up, in our paper recently published in the Journal of Psychedelic Studies, we extended that definition, and so our definition for inner healing intelligence is basically it's the innate capacity of an individual to move towards healing by engaging with the vital life force of existence, specific to place and intrinsic to the myriad more than human relationships, the many more than human relationships that constitute the extended self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this expanded definition we developed in thinking about the deep history of inner healing intelligence, perhaps not, framed like that or named like that, but still inherent to much of the traditional healing systems that can be traced today, such as the chi of the Taoist medicine or the prana of the Ayurvedic medicine, these idea of the life force that guides the healing processes, those vitalist take on healing are connected to that recuperation, re-emergence of inner healing intelligence in psychedelic studies. So we try to dig and see where those connections are made, and what might have been neglected in translation as well in that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything to add on your end, Laura?
And just to add a little bit there in terms of the term it's widely attributed to Stan Grof in the Western paradigm, as you had mentioned, Keith. And I was struck in our research about looking at how he developed the term in the 90s, seemingly in his work, looking at the healing radar, inner radar, or inner healing, as he was working through, and then this term inner healing intelligence, which then has been utilized in various psychedelic-assisted therapy clinical studies. So part of what we were looking to do was to expand that idea and further articulate the idea of inner healing intelligence to the more than human world, and to include more than human beings in that concept of healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned in your paper and a little bit now that this concept is sort of under-theorized, and you're hoping to revisit or expand on this concept. So How do you think inner healing intelligence relates to like modern psychedelic research, and why was it so important to revisit it at this moment in psychedelic research? I would love to know your take on that, and if it sort of challenges to a certain degree the current frameworks in which psychedelics are studied.
Maybe I can start on this just to get back to the vitalist component, like the vitalist orientation that inner healing intelligence suggests, you know. Um, if engaging with that concept in medicine and psychedelic studies, there needs to be an assessment of the coherence that this concept has or doesn't have with the paradigm within which the psychedelic study operates or unfolds. So for us to bring light to the tenets of inner healing intelligence and contribute to the expansion of its definition or contribute to its better theorization helps us to make visible the assumptions that are held underneath the paradigm that holds together the clinical trial in, like the dominant clinical trial in psychedelic studies. So that's a way for us to show the potential incoherence in language and to invite us to revisit ways to bring back coherence in the paradigm that supports research in psychedelic studies. Yeah.
And you know, I guess further to that, it's like to build on what Andrée-Anne was saying, it's really, you know, in some ways it feels like there's an incommensurability between the biomedical and Western psychological paradigms, and then this notion of this vital healing force that's sort of courses through all of creation. And I think so in a way it's super interesting that this has come up and is really underpins so much of contemporary psychedelic assisted therapy. And I think finding a way to, you know, to bring that more closely into or theorize that more deeply, I think will allow folks in our field to better leverage that vital life force for the benefit of their patients, clients, and essentially the world. And it's so funny, you know, I remember as we did our research for this, I mean, maybe funny is not the right word, but I remember, you know, going through a number of Stan Grof's books to find references to inner healing intelligence, and it's so limited for such a you know, a profound and like foundational concept. I mean, if you look at the MAPS MDMA assisted therapy protocol prepared by the Mythoverse, inner healing intelligence is part of that, and that's kind of, I mean, maybe it's changing, but that certainly has been an industry standard, so to speak, for a very long time. But yet, you know, very little attention has been paid to this idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and before we get too much further, I do want to break down the concept of vitalism for anyone who maybe hasn't heard of that before. So, does someone mind defining that and explaining that in terms of inner healing intelligence, where they're really connected?
And that's a really good question. Vitalism is a current of thought, is that what we call an existential attitude to questions that don't have answers at this point, essentially. So there is no way to explain the irreducible nature of life, you know, the entertainment. I have a hard time with my English words when I'm nervous. My apologies.
No worries.
But it's a way to explain the emergence of life in in a way that that encompass the continuity of life and the ability for life to move towards wholeness, for life as individual or as systems, whichever scale we look at, we see that there's this tendency towards wholeness and towards healing that is present. It's a phenomenon that is observed, and that is observed again and again. It's an intuition that has been iterated by many through the ages. This ability for life to occur and reproduce itself at all scales. but for which we do not have an explanation. This idea of co-becoming that's being articulated in post-humanity nowadays is also reflective of that vital force, that élan vital, that irreducible nature of life, and the co-constitutive relationship between living and knowing, or being aware, being conscious, and being in existence. It's really at that juncture of the unknown that a decision needs to be made about which attitude we take in face of that unknown. The vitalist attitude is one path, as opposed to a materialist or positivist attitude, for example. And that tension, that binary tension, has been present through the history of Western medicine for hundreds and hundreds of years, and is well documented. We live in an era where vitalism tends to be the poor child in that duality. But there is a new movement, like a more recent movement of return to vitalism as a way of taking an ethical stance in face of the existential problems of our time. So we hear a lot about critical vitalism as a new avenue to thinking about vitalism in our era. Yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like we're getting to the concept that, in really simple terms, people have a tendency to like move towards healing, and we have that ability in us. Is that like a fair thing to say?
That's right. And healing in that understanding is not limited to getting fixed, right? Because the individual is a complex system composed of cells that are complex systems themselves, and the individual is in an environment that's a complex system. All these complex systems have this ability to move towards healing. But as part of that healing process, healing doesn't always look like what we think of in immediate terms, right? So we need to keep that in perspective as well when we talk about healing from a vitalist perspective, from a complex system perspective. Uh, it is not a finite process; it's an emergent process. Yeah, I should point that out before we go too much further.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that. And Keith and Laura, was there anything there that you wanted to expand on?
I do, but I can go last.
Please, go ahead. That was great, Andrée-Anne.
Yeah, thank you, Andrée-Anne. Well, I guess just to quickly add to that, we cited Normandin and Wolff, 2013, and they talk about vitalism requiring a meta-theoretical orientation. And I guess that gets back to some of what we talked about earlier regarding the incommensurability between vitalist thought and say, materialism, positivism, mechanistic thought. And so I guess what I'm wondering, and perhaps what we're wondering, is what kind of rich possibilities could emerge if we take a more pragmatic stance and allow for that philosophical incommensurability, at least at this point, of this new vitalism and Western science to exist in the same healing container. And really, this is already happening. Inner healing intelligence, and by extension vitalism, it's baked into contemporary psychedelic-assisted therapy approaches. And rather than capitulating to the pushback against what some perceive as the non-scientific aspects of inner healing intelligence, I guess I wonder what possibilities might emerge for healing and connection if we explicitly attend to and possibly even amplify the vitalistic underpinnings of contemporary psychedelic-assisted therapy.
Yeah, very thought-provoking. And another thing you write about is healing not as just something inside of us, but also it's about our relationship to land and nature and what you call more than human beings. So could you give us an example of what this looks like in practice? I love the image from your paper about the skin contains land and birds. So what does that phrase mean, and what does it capture about how you see healing?
I could start unless someone else wants to.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and I guess, that I love that expression, skin contains land and birds, and that's from Linda Hogan. She's a Chickasaw poet and environmental activist. And I think we all found it so evocative in that it really captures the profound and reciprocal or mutual entanglement between our bodies, really ourselves, and the world in which we live. And for me, this line, this poetic line, also implicitly suggests that land and birds also contain human skin and much more. And from that realization, I think we can derive both an environmental ethic and an approach to healing. And I feel like this environmental ethic part is underexplored, and I'm so glad that Laura is doing the work that you're doing, Laura, on arboreal ethics. It's brilliant and important, and I can see that being brought into psychedelic assisted therapy practice, to be honest. And I think to your question, Elena, I think what that looks like for me is many things. It could look like Indigenous cultural rediscovery as a means to heal from the trauma of colonization, for example, at the Dechinta Institute in the Northwest Territories. It could look like doctors in Western countries increasingly prescribing nature for different ailments. It could look like an integral version of the doctrine of signatures. It could look like Amazonian and Andean traditional medicine that seeks assistance in healing from the Apus, Encantos, and Incas, or place-based and plant-allied spirits. I live in the Annapolis Valley of Nova Scotia on a fairly largish acreage that had been farmed unsustainably for decades. And there's really virtually no organic matter left in the first 3 soil horizons, which makes growing food and medicine plants very challenging. I love gardening. And that's very challenging. And so, and related to that, and speaking of challenging, I've had a very personally challenging few years recently. And really, the only thing I think that's kept my head above water is engaging with the natural world. And that includes tending to those plants, looking after the soil, and then nourishing my loved ones, including both neighbors, both human and more than human, with the things that come from that garden. So I guess that's a very personal answer, but that for me, that's what that kind of land-based healing, or healing that brings the land into conversation, might look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Laura, did you want to expand on that at all?
Yes, and thank you, Keith, for getting us started with this question. The practical question is such a great one in terms of how this might look. So, at least in the clinical trial perspective, right now a lot of those studies are done in the clinic, and there is not access for the participants or patients to have any kind of connection with the outside environment where the clinic exists. And that is one place where I see within the Western clinical paradigm to have a bit more of this connection with more than human beings. Just to break down that term a little bit, it was coined by phenomenologist David Abram, and it speaks to the animals, the plants, the fungi, the interconnections that most people I think would call nature, but more than human, the term more than human acknowledges those beings as beings. And I know that in just a few of the studies that are the FDA-approved studies here in the U.S., there's starting to be a few where the participants have access to natural environments, to go outdoors around the time of the studies. I know that's much more common around the world and in other places where studies are happening. So that's one way. Another way is the tradition of the rose, especially in psilocybin studies where the participant receives a red rose. So bringing those more than human beings into the treatment room is another potential way to bring in that aspect, and as you mentioned, the relationship part of each individual's connection to their own place and understanding their own situatedness within the course of the place's situatedness and the original peoples of that space, and the plants, the animals that live there, and then also of the medicines themselves. Even the synthetic medicines are derived from precursors that are from plants or fungi, and recognizing those aspects as well are some of the ways that this could be enacted more practically. And Keith, you also, thank you for bringing up the arboreal ethics piece, and done a little bit of work on place-based rights for trees and plants, and maybe kind of thinking about trees and plants as having a right to place, even if they don't necessarily have a right to life, and thinking about different rights models for more than human beings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like really extending the conversation about bringing it a little more into the psychedelic therapy space, like what constitutes your environment and your context, and how important it might be to have access to those more than beings during the experience. And it also reminds me about ideas of, especially when Keith was talking about his gardening and sharing that with his community, sort of the ideas of reciprocity. And so I really loved the opening up of this conversation to those ideas. Andrée-Anne, did you want to add something there?
Well, I had written on my paper here the notion of responsibility, and you're just bringing it up here in your thought. We had aligned thoughts on this idea where we understand healing as belonging, as a meaning-making process, like to what is our place in the world. It brings that notion of responsibility and reciprocity to our sustaining environments, to our medicines, to ourselves, to the original people that carried the teachings and took care of the medicines and the territory. So there is really that notion that becomes embedded in our approach to how we do good research as well, how we engage in good ways with those medicines. For good healing to occur, we're starting to see emerging from the literature and from a recent collaboration Keith and I just had with Pedro Favaron, a scholar in ayahuasca medicine from Peru, and he speaks of the threat of the cutibados or copia in Shipibos, which are, I don't know how we will call this, but it's a warning for the misuse of ancestral medicine that could cause unexpected illnesses on the people, on the community, on the environment. These are teachings that we have a responsibility to take seriously in an era that we claim and that we want to be different, in this ontological turn era, in this time of reconciliation. It is our responsibility to be in dialogue with each other, with each other's cultures and traditional teachings, and traditional as current but informed by tradition teachings. So yeah, to me this paper is also a call in practice to slow down, take a step back, and really take a moment to uncover our assumptions. So I'm circling back to the beginning of our conversation, but I think this in practice is critical, perhaps even more so than any like boxes to check in the actual clinical trials, which are also valuable. But we're asking for a much deeper, much more critical assessment of the assumptions underlying the ways in which clinical trials are taking place, which I know is a big question, is a big deal, but it's also an exciting perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think that offers a lot of valuable insight. Keith, you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Just a couple things really quickly. I hope I don't forget them all. Further to Laura's comments, I think integration, whether and I consider sort of pre-session conversations as part of that integration process. I think there's a lot of room in integration for bringing our relationship with the natural world into psychedelic assisted therapy. And I just want to highlight Laura's book once more. Her recent book on arboreal ethics, written with David Macaulay, and that was published in 2025. And I don't know how explicit you were in that book about psychedelics, Laura, maybe not a whole lot, but I think that there's a lot of room for bringing this notion of arboreal ethics into psychedelic-assisted therapy, particularly when we're looking at psychedelics that are from from woody plants, and so that includes 5-methoxy-DMT, that includes DMT, that includes MDMA. So all of these, and iboga, and possibly more. So all of these contemporary psychedelics, they are found, or precursors are found in woody plant species. And I guess there's something I wanted to add to Andrée-Anne's point as well. Around, I'm sorry, maybe it's gone. I'll probably come back to it later.
Yeah, just let me
Should have
know. We
written
can
it down.
always circle back. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's such a rich, like this is so rich. And okay, yeah, no, I remember now. And thank you so much, Andrée-Anne, for bringing up Pedro Favaron's work. He's a professor at La Católica in Lima, and he lives between there and Santa Clara de Yarinacocha in near Pucallpa in Peru. And so cutiparos are very interesting. So this is basically like an illness that can arise from my limited understanding if there's an imbalance in the way that ayahuasca is taken or is used in ceremony. And I think in my mind, like that kind of underscores like the real importance of these traditional approaches to sacred plant medicines, and it's like I think not only could integrating land-based healing and the natural world into psychedelic-assisted therapy, not only could that benefit clients or patients, but but not bringing it in or bringing those things in the wrong way could actually cause harm. So depending on your worldview. So I think there's some really fascinating and important work to be done in that particular area. And I highly recommend, if anyone has a chance to look for Pedro's work. I don't know if you have show notes. We can share some of that for the show notes later on.
Yeah, I can definitely include that in the show notes if you share that with me. So it
Sure.
seems like we're getting towards the idea that there can be benefits of considering these broader factors surrounding inner healing intelligence, and also potentially harms if we aren't considering these. So getting a bit more practical, we know that Western psychedelic therapy is often very medicalized in terms of the setting that it's implemented. So you're all very thoughtfully highlighting these more like relational and ecological dimensions. So how do you see psychedelic therapy in the Western world shifting? How could we incorporate these broader factors from a practical lens? Does that look like more ceremonial aspects, or incorporation of indigenous philosophies, or just time in nature during the experience? What do you all see that looking like?
Well, I mean, does anyone else want to go first? Because I've
Go
gone
ahead.
first. Oh, okay. I'll just. I don't have a lot to say about this, so I'll try to be quick. I think I think we would all agree on this point because we've talked about it. I think Laura and Andrée-Anne and I are all advocates for pluralism in healthcare, and in traditional healing practices, all healing practices. So I guess what I don't deny the fact that people can be healed in medicalized settings. That can happen, of course. But I'd just like to see more room for collective healing at the community level, decentralized, de-expertized, decolonized, and decommodified. I guess in terms of the natural world, I think it's probably much easier to bring that into healing in retreat center contexts, for instance. But Laura had identified a number of ways in which that could be brought into the clinic. I think Andrée-Anne did as well. And I guess, yeah, so I think even in contemporary medical settings, there really is room to bring in more relational and ecological approaches into those I guess, contemporary mainstream containers.
Yeah, anything to add from Laura or Andrée-Anne?
I'd just like to add that, of course, there are very good reasons for the boundaries of Western clinical research. And so I want to acknowledge that. And I myself am not a clinician, so I want to acknowledge that as well, and that there is a lot of good work going on in that realm. And our inquiry and our invitation is to expand those ideas in ways that do include the more than human, as you were just talking about, Keith, and in various ways to allow for other ideas, as well as the clinical model that, as I said, does a lot of great work, and there could be more conversation around this idea. And we do hope that this work may lead to more research. One of the critiques of inner healing intelligence is that the empirical testing of inner healing intelligence has been so far very difficult, but perhaps there are other ways. Maybe there will be more empirical ways to test this in studies, or perhaps with interviews, as we suggest towards the end of the paper, that there may be other ways to continue this articulation of inner healing intelligence in the psychedelic assisted therapy and research world.
Yeah, I really think the paper really brings light to this concept that a lot of people in the field probably haven't even heard about before. So it seems like a really great starting place for more research and more work in this area. And I like that you mentioned the critiques. I think that's also important to touch on in this conversation. Another one that I noticed you mentioned in your paper is that some might worry that invoking inner healing intelligence could place a lot of responsibility on the patients themselves if outcomes are poor. So how do you respond to those concerns, and how could those be possibly addressed in the future?
That's a very individualist take into what healing intelligence represent. I think it stems from a misunderstanding of inner healing intelligence to start with. Yeah, I think that would be my comment on that one.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Keith or Laura, anything else to add to that one?
Yeah, I would agree with what you said, Andrée-Anne, and also just in terms of that the kind of multiplicity that you were speaking to, Keith, that this is one perspective on that idea of healing, and we're not promoting it as the only perspective.
Correct.
Yeah. And I also third Andrée-Anne's comment about that misunderstanding, and I think it's so hard for us to look at things beyond that individualistic lens, because that is typically the unit of study, is the individual, the unit of focus. And I guess inner healing intelligence, it could be difficult to test. To be honest, I haven't really put a whole lot of thought into that. But in our paper, one of the things that we suggested is some additions to the nature relatedness scale that could get closer to maybe a more objective understanding of patient or client perception of inner healing intelligence. Overall, though, I guess going back to some of what we talked about earlier and drawing on Normandin and Wolff, 2013, I think inner healing intelligence perhaps requires more of a meta-theoretical commitment, or a theoretical bricolage, in which we suspend our issues with the philosophical incommensurability between, for example, Western science and other ways of understanding healing, on the path to maybe something that's a little bit more aligned and integral.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point there, that suspension of disbelief. Because we're not saying that inner healing intelligence, or other vitalistic notion for that matter, couldn't be explained by mechanistic science. There's a possibility, although I don't know. Like, I think a lot have tried, and I'm not sure that there is a material entity to identify. Like, we're not supposing this, but we're saying this phenomenon is observed time and time and time again. We need to acknowledge it. It cannot be ignored, and in fact, it's not ignored. It's vastly engaged with in ways that perhaps are not always coherent. We are identifying that, but what we're saying is that it is there. What do we do now? You know, how do we work with this, acknowledging its presence before we can theorize it in a satisfying way? Like in Western medicine specifically, I don't know how we're gonna get to theorize it in a satisfying way. There is a possibility that it, well, most likely it will occur through dialogue with cultures who've been engaged with that notion, including Western culture, who've been engaging with this notion for a long time. Who knows which direction it will take, but we're inviting this, we're bringing this up as a way to shake us up a little bit and realize that there is perhaps more than what biomedicine or psychological medicine acknowledges. So we're opening the playing field a little bit, opening the imaginaries a little bit. One of the things we didn't discuss in our paper, but that is perhaps relevant to this conversation, is the field of complex systems science that has emerged as a response to those difficult questions, and that is a really important domain in Western herbal medicine, and that I believe might become more and more important in psychedelic medicine as well, working with plants as that are complex being with emergent properties. The effect of a plant on a body, a complex being on another complex being interfacing, the effect of this interface is rarely linear. You know, and we know this as herbalists, as clinical herbalists. It's very difficult to work with a plant and expect consistent response from people. We cannot expect that, and it's why we work with a language that is, we call this the energetic language of herbal medicine, where we are very qualitative with our terminology, and we work with terms that matches our observation. Even though it's really difficult to validate from a Western scientific lens, it is a very empirical science. The concept of inner healing intelligence also stems from that long history of observation, of careful attunement to the response of bodies in different situations, in interaction with different beings. So yeah, we're not landing on any firm theoretical framework to speak of inner intelligence, nothing like that. We're rather opening a door so we can revive that conversation and bring this idea in dialogue.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And yeah, it is really the beginning of understanding this and different ways to study it. Keith mentions potentially an objective way to measure it with the nature relatedness scale, but you guys have also chatted about qualitative research. So what do you think that could look like for someone who's wanting to implement some kind of measure of this in their study or to apply this to their own research? How could someone do that from a methodological viewpoint? You mentioned, qualitative research, or maybe phenomenology could play a role here. Do you think that would be valuable for researchers?
We'll let my colleagues who are much better versed in the academic world than me to answer
this. I appreciate this question, and I might. One of the things that came to mind when you were asking that question is maybe something like an inner healing intelligence scale of some sort is needed. Maybe there's further research needed, and I like the idea of using a phenomenological methodology in order to study a bit more about the participant's experience with inner healing intelligence. So these could be possible, and I'd be curious what those who are clinicians think about how this could be mobilized in that realm.
I love that suggestion, that inner healing intelligence scale. That's exciting, Laura. I really like that. Um, maybe that could be our next follow-up paper, or the one after the one we've already talked about doing. Um, what's interesting to me, and I don't know, I don't know if this makes any sense. It just sort of arrived in my head. I was thinking, inner healing intelligence. I mean, it relies on this vital life force, and that vital life force is everywhere all the time. It's always already present, and and so for that reason, it's like, how on earth can you study something like that? Because typically in West, like according to the tenets of Western science, because you need to place yourself outside of a phenomenon and able to observe it objectively. But if it's everywhere already, how can we place ourselves outside of that in order to observe it? So I think this is a challenge to, I think, Western scientific approaches and that positivist paradigm. Um, so I think looking at other methodological approaches that kind of reconcile the subject as part of a phenomenon must be the way to go. And having said that, though, and so that could include things like autoethnography, for example. But having said that, I guess I'm also thinking as so. Here's another thought. So perhaps if an autoethnographic account, a textured, richly qualitative textured account of a patient or client's experience of inner healing intelligence, if something like that could discern gradations of experiencing inner healing intelligence, that might be enough of a difference from which you could observe aspects of that phenomenon quasi-objectively. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's just something that kind of arrived as we were all talking.
Sounds like your next paper. Your
Yeah,
next
maybe.
book.
Yeah. We'll put it on the list. That'll be
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I guess there are many sides to the question of what could be studied here. Are we looking at whether or not inner healing intelligence exists, if it's a thing or not, Are we looking at the effect of that trust in a healer, inner healer, in the therapeutic outcomes? What outcomes are we looking at, What are we speaking of when speaking of healing, and what kind of time frame? The, I think it could be challenging to implement in a short term study
Mm.
in terms of the lasting effect. It has a lot to do with the meaning making aspect of healing, that inner healing intelligence as an embodiment to place, a connection to place. Um, yeah, it would be a really interesting topic to tackle, but we might need guidance um, from experts in the field, including traditional knowledge holders. Yeah, something we hesitated in formulating recommendations about,
Mhm.
because we're not quite there yet. We need to we need to have this paper, this conversation challenged and engaged with others. In my opinion, I don't know if you will agree with this, but I think we need far more conversation before we even arrive at what is it that collectively will be valuable for us to seek in research on this, specifically like in clinic. I think something that already we've been kind of positioning as a topic of inquiry is the ethical implication of this meta-theoretical commitment. I think there is room for further research already laid out in that realm, in the ethical realm, of that leap, of that, decision, commitment, and assumptions. But in terms of the clinic, yeah, I think we need to challenge our thought much further with others. Um,
Yeah, I look forward to those ideas, seeing those ideas evolve over time, and hopefully this podcast can be a beginning of the conversation with other researchers, and maybe others will connect with you after hearing this conversation to discuss more. But we are coming close to the end of the episode, so I do want to get to our final question because I am excited about it. I want to hear from each of you about one practice, it can be big or small, that you think people could take away from this conversation and integrate into their everyday lives to connect with their own inner healing intelligence. So how do you see someone going about that?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I remember reading that on your list that you sent us that perhaps I should have spent more time with. But it's such a good question and it's a tricky one. But what comes to my mind right now, and I'll throw it out there, is um, resisting jumping to conclusions about one's own experience in the moment, like whether it's suffering or wellness, or, like in the whole spectrum of experience, resisting the too rapid pathologization of discomfort or tension, or and taking a moment to listen to perhaps what this may be saying about the healing path on which one might be. Not to say that we need to let go and be neglectful of important symptoms. I'm much before the clinical realm of pathology, but just in terms of those small symptoms, those small discomfort, those small tensions we experience on a daily basis, to take a moment and listen to that as perhaps a message from a broader innate healing intelligence.
Thank you. I like that answer. Laura, how about yourself?
I, in thinking about this question, which is, I think, a wonderful question, I came to something similar as your response, Andrée-Anne, of listening, listening within and slowing down, as you said earlier, Andrée-Anne. I think one of the things that I have found in the course of my study of plants, more generally, not just psychedelic plants, but plants in general, is that slowing down and that listening, that careful way of just existing in the world with another being, and with a relationship of beings. And so that sense of listening is something that's a daily practice, either with, say, a cup of mint tea. I often will have a relationship with the mint plant in that way, or on a walk with a particular tree in my neighborhood, just having that moment of listening. And I think that could also be applied to the inner intelligence idea as well, of listening to that small voice within. We'll use that idea.
Oh my gosh, it's giving me so many good things to think about. Keith?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting that, and just to echo Laura and Andrée-Anne, it's so interesting that, we didn't talk about this before we arrived here today. And I feel like so much of our thinking is so aligned, which is really, it's quite lovely, and I mean, there's still productive tensions, but, it's so nice that we're all coming to similar conclusions in a way. And so I live on the Minas Basin, which is connected to the Bay of Fundy, and we have the world's highest and lowest tides here. Over the years, I've heard stories about old-timers who could be miles inland doing woods work for weeks, and they knew in their bodies when the tide was high. I've also heard about older people who used to be able to see the stars during the daytime. I love these stories, and I yearn for that kind of attunement in my own life, and I'm working towards it, touch wood. So many of us are dissociated from our bodies for various reasons, and as people, working in the psychedelic field, that, of course, dissociation is one of the main reasons why people come to psychedelic assisted therapy. And I think really following a sensory or somatic breadcrumb trail that allows us to perceive those subtleties about the natural world and our more than human kin, I think that would be a good place to start. And just remembering too that, innate healing intelligence or inner healing intelligence, as we formulated it, is really it's a distributed, a distributed healing process or approach. And so, the limits of ourselves extend beyond our integumentary system to include, those with whom we're in relation, and the healing works that way too, and so I think starting by quieting ourselves and attending to what comes up, particularly in natural settings, is what I would, in a nutshell, what I would say.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining me here today. That'll conclude the episode. But that was truly a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Elena.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for listening to this fascinating conversation about inner healing intelligence with Keith, Andrée-Anne, and Laura. I'd like to thank the Center for Psychedelics Health and Research at Queen's University and the support of our sponsors at the Ontario Brain Institute, the Canadian Biomarker Integration Network in Depression, and Providence Care Hospital. Until next time, be well and integrate wisely.